I'm a little bit surprised na ganun ang naging numero. But I look at those numbers for one. I tell all my staff, magandang numero. You can pat yourself on the back for 1 minute, then tama na, balik sa trabaho. I don't really live by them.
Kami sineseryoso namin yung surveys. Sineseryoso namin, pero kung ang tanong, nababahala ba kami, hindi. Coming from 2016, halos ganito yung trajectory. I was coming from 1-2%. Pero pumalo talaga yung numbers ko late March and April already. In fact, kahit si President Duterte, at this time, 6 years ago, hindi pa siya frontrunner.
You heard from the top 2 presidential aspirants, at least based on survey results. Speaking with One News candidate talks, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said he himself was surprised over his wide and consistent lead in the surveys. But he says he can't afford to be complacent.
His closest rival, all the way far second, Vice President Leni Robredo, says they take these results seriously. But she goes back to her experience in 2016, when she was also trailing at this stage of the campaign, only to emerge victorious in the polls. Time for today's biggest headlines. I'm Gretchen Ho.
I'm Robbie Alampa. You're watching The Big Story. Even as Ferdinand Marcos Jr. maintains his huge lead in the latest presidential survey of Pulse Asia for February, the presidential candidate says this is not time to be complacent.
While political parties await President Duterte's endorsement, Marcos says he continues his campaign and talks about fact-checking, Solid North, and martial law during the One News Forum Candidate Talks. His one-on-one with Cheryl Cosim in tonight's Big Story.
If surveys are to be believed, presidential aspirant Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has a comfortable lead over his opponents. With every survey, Marcos Jr. has made it a norm to bag at least 50% of the respondents' votes. In the most recent Pulse Asia presidential survey, 6 out of 10 respondents prefer him over the others. But in my one-on-one interview with the Marcos heir on One News and Go Negocios Candidatox, he says being complacent is not an option.
I tell all my staff, magandang numero. You can pat yourself on the back for 1 minute, then tama na, balik sa trabaho. I don't really live by them.
While he still wants to get the president's endorsement, Marcos Jr. admits that it's still unclear whom Duterte is vouching for.
Pare-pareho naman tayo nalilito. Basta't kami ni Pangulong Duterte, kung ano yung napag-usapan namin, yun ang pinag-usapan namin.
And as election day draws near, the mudslinging intensifies. With this, Marcos says he is not opposed to fact-checkers, save for those with an agenda.
Pero yung mga fact-checker naman kung minsan ay may sariling agenda. Kaya't pina-fact-check lang nila yung one side of the story.
Speaking of facts, Marcos Jr. encouraged the public to do their own research on his father's martial rule.
Ano ba talagang nangyari? So sinasagot ko, wag lang kayo makinig sa akin dahil may agenda din ako eh. Ama ko yan eh. Siyempre, kakampi ko siya. Mag-aral kayo. Mag-research kayo na mabuti.
Marcos Jr. says the only verdict that matters is the result of the May 9 polls. And despite questions on how intact the so-called Solid North is, Marcos says only those from his bailiwick can decide.
I think kaya merong may phraseology na Solid North dahil naipakita na yan eh. So tignan na lang natin sa resulta. At ano pang isasagot ko na hindi, pipilitin ko na meron.
Cheryl Cosim, we are One News.
Despite the results of the February Pulse Asia survey, other presidential bets tailing behind frontrunner Marcos Jr. say the elections are far from over, as they remain confident of their chances to win over voters. Camille Samonte with the details.
Presidential candidate Ferdinand Marcos Jr. remains head and shoulder above competition in the recent Pulse Asia survey. 60% of respondents say they prefer Marcos over the other candidates. His closest rival, Vice President Leni Robredo, is a far second with 15%. But Robredo is unfazed. She says this is just a repeat of what happened in 2016 when she was trailing behind Marcos until the latter part of March.
Kung ang tanong, nababahala ba kami? Hindi. Coming from 2016, halos ganito yung trajectory. I was coming from 1-2%. Pero pumalo talaga yung numbers ko late March and April already.
The Robredo camp also says the surveys were conducted before her series of campaign rallies, which saw thousands and thousands of supporters. As for Mayor Isko Moreno, the survey results are already outdated. He says they will continue to make the rounds to gather more votes.
We will continue to be with people, reach as many kilometers as possible, reach as many eyeballs as possible, and try to, convince them. Sabi ko nga, katulad nung halimbawa, nasa northern region tayo, ngayon nasa southern Luzon. Ano man tigas ng bulalo, lalambot din yun.
Senator Lacson meanwhile finds it hard to believe that he only garnered 2%.
Parang hindi ko kayang tanggapin na pagkatapos pa ng mga presidential forums saka mga interviews, lalo pa akong lalagapak.
Labor leader Leody de Guzman, on the other hand, says he remains confident that Filipinos will make the right choice. And as for Senator Manny Pacquiao, the lawmaker said he no longer believes in surveys, especially after the quote, laughable numbers.
2 dekada na lumipas, hindi naman nasusunod yung survey. Magpakita sila ng survey for the past 2 decades na lumipas sa eleksyon natin na ang survey na tumama. Kung sino yung sinusuportahan ng DE class, yun ang nananalo.
Pulse Asia, however, stand by its survey. They point out that attendance in rallies can be misleading as these sorties only attract supporters. For News 5, Camille Samonte, we are One News.
What trends are we seeing from voters in their preference for presidential candidate? That big question and more with Pulse Asia Research Director Ana Tabunda. Director Tabunda, welcome to the big story.
Good evening po.
Good evening po. All the candidates, of course, other than Bongbong Marcos, putting up a brave front. Everybody saying mahaba pa tong laban. Vice President Leni Robredo saying nung March, April lang ako nag-surge. Even President Duterte. Historically, do we have basis for saying that we still have a long time and a lot can still change in this less than 2 months?
I think that's the right attitude to take, that they're not going to be faced by the results of the surveys. That they will continue to try to get win as many voters over to their side as possible. That's the correct strategy to take.
Right, but that's the correct attitude. But what I'm asking is, you've been polling, you've been tracking the numbers over so many elections. Historically speaking, have we seen that in past elections that numbers can drastically shift over the remaining 6-7 weeks?
We have seen it in past elections that the numbers shifted, but we cannot call it drastic shifts because the leads back then were not as large as the lead that we are now seeing, the gap we are now seeing between the front runner and the one next to him.
Okay. Now, a lot of people, of course, are focused on the headline rankings, on the headline numbers, and when they look at it, sinasabi nila, para wala namang nagbabago. But if we dig deeper, are there trends, digging deeper into other questions you asked that people may be missing and that might be worth highlighting?
Well, no, we don't see any significant change in the February results compared to the January results. It's stayed. The figures are essentially the same.
Okay. Maraming salamat po. That was Pulse Asia Research Director Ana Tabunda. Tonight.
Metro Manila and 47 other areas will stay under Alert Level 1 until the end of the month, even as mayors say they are ready and willing to downgrade further to Alert Level 0. But what does Alert Level 0 even mean? Health officials say this might mean mask off in certain settings. And after fuel prices rose the most in more than a decade, we give you some tips on how to save up on fuel. These big stories after the break.
You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho.
No alert level 0 yet. Metro Manila and 47 other areas are still placed under alert level 1 starting March 16 until March 31.
This comes after NCR mayors expressed readiness should the region be de-escalated to alert level 0. For more details on that, we have Maricel Halili reporting live from Mandaluyong. First off, Mase, what areas are under alert level 1?
Hi, Gretchen. The IATF has released a decision with regards to the alert level status. They have placed or they have decided to extend the alert level 1 status in the National Capital Region up until the end of March, as well as with other 47 other cities and provinces all over the country. But earlier today, we have asked MMDA General Manager Frisco San Juan if the Metro Manila mayors are ready or in favor of placing the whole Metro Manila under alert level 0. He actually said that there's no one or none of the Metro Manila mayors oppose the idea of placing NCR under alert level 0. He actually assured the public that Metro Manila mayors are ready to implement alert level 0 in the whole region. Here's what he had to say.
Pero nakahanda po ang Metro Manila mayors kung sakasakali man mag-decision po ang ating IATF na ibaba sa level 0. Nakahanda po ang ating mga mayors at ban po nila kung ano ang mga nararapat na gagawin.
But despite expressing their readiness to impose alert level 0 in the whole National Capital Region, MMDA Undersecretary San Juan still insisted that it will be better if we will still retain the masking policy.
Mase, speaking of the masking policy, how likely is it that face masks will no longer be required under a supposed alert level 0?
Robbie, in a press briefing earlier, Undersecretary Mirna Cabutahe said that there is a possibility that the mandatory wearing of face mask will no longer be imposed except on certain areas, especially crowded areas and in hospital setting. But of course, Yusek Abutahe has reminded everyone to still follow health protocols.
Yan, nasabi na ni Secretary Duque na baka pwede nang alisin yung pagmamask unless yung mga tataong lugar magkakakilala, pwedeng magkakalapit.
Robbie, in a separate briefing, Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergeres said that an alert level 0 might mean lessening required COVID response, including the possibility of no longer requiring COVID beds in hospitals and integrating COVID conditions in infectious disease units in various hospitals. But let me clarify, Robbie and Gretchen, that up until now, the members of the IATF is still finalizing the guidelines under alert level 0. So we still have to wait and see.
Since you brought it up, today is actually the pandemic lockdown anniversary and there's still COVID. Are there any areas in the country still registering high number of COVID-19 cases, especially now that a Delta Cron variant has emerged?
Gretchen, actually, the Delta Cron variant, the Department of Health has actually clarified that it's not yet a variant of concern. So for now, they are still monitoring the situation when it comes to the Delta Cron issue. And probably that was last week when Health Secretary Francisco Duque mentioned that they are still waiting for more information from the World Health Organization with regards to this variant. Well, on the COVID-19 cases, Vergeres said that all areas in the country are now classified as low risk.
Maraming salamat. That was Maricel Halili reporting live from Mandaluyong. In other news, the President is stepping in over the series of oil price hikes. He's meeting economic managers tonight to discuss the possibility of suspending excise taxes on fuel.
But as early as now, the Finance Department says doing so might mean cutting down on social subsidies. Mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez with the story.
After weeks of pressure, President Duterte is meeting with the Energy and Finance departments to decide whether or not to suspend fuel excise taxes. But already the DOF, whom the President rarely vetoes, has put its foot down.
In the long run, malaki po ang mawawala sa atin. Around 1.5 trillion pesos po ang mawawala hanggang 2032.
This comes after oil companies hiked prices of diesel by more than 13 pesos this week, the biggest one-time increase in decades. Dozens of transport groups are planning to hold strikes or tigil pasada beginning this week to protest 11 straight weeks of fuel increases caused by the war in Ukraine. That's the longest streak the country has ever suffered. Commuters also took to the streets to protest skyrocketing prices and to call for the amendment of the oil deregulation law. Ironically, the DOF says suspending the fuel taxes will in fact eat into the budget for subsidies for poorer families.
Excise taxes, yun po yung pinampupondo natin doon at saka yung ating infrastructure spending.
The DOF warned that the government will lose more than 138 billion pesos in 1 year alone if all taxes on fuel are suspended. Instead, it wants to focus on distributing targeted subsidies to affected sectors, with eligible drivers and fisherfolk receiving 6,500 each this month and again next month. Congress is urging President Duterte to call for a special session to discuss the issue. Mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez, We Are One News.
For the big story in sports, Pinay volleyball star Mylene Paat makes history as she recently bagged the Best Scorer award in the Thai Volleyball League. Mylene now says the experience has her pumped up to take her team, Cherry Tigo, to the championships in the new season of the Philippine Volleyball League. The details in my report.
And Paat gets the score.
Known to volleyball fans as the deadly lefty, Mylene Paat is one of Philippine volleyball's biggest revelations. After helping her club team Cherry Tigo to its first PBL championship,
เปลี่ยนมาที่ไมลีน
Mylene has dominated the Volleyball Thailand League with Nakhon Ratchasima. Here, she became the first Pinoy volleyball player to bag an international accolade after bagging the Best Scorer award.
Napaiyak na lang ako kasi sabi ko, parang naging worth it lahat ng pagod, lahat ng sakripisyo. Kasi nagstay ako doon for 3 months. And then nakuha pa namin yung bronze medal. Parang dala-dala ko rin yung Pilipinas pangalan ng Pilipinas sa paglalaro ko sa ibang bansa.
But behind her success was also a lot of struggles, including losing her biggest supporter.
Last year, namatay din kasi yung mom ko. Actually, namatay siya ng birthday ko last year. April 5. Kaya sobrang, tingnan ko ngayon, naiiyak pa rin ako kasi wala akong time mag-moment. Yung sing-sing ng mother ko, nilagay ko kasi sa shoes ko. Kada game ko, naiiyak ako, Ate Gresh. Kada game ko, kinikiss ko talaga yung ring ng mother ko. So sabi ko, para sa'yo to, ma'am.
Despite the loss, Mylene says life still has a way of proving that things can always be better.
Huwag kayong basta-basta mag-give up kasi in the right time, in the right place, makukuha nyo rin yan. Basta may tiwala kayo sa sarili nyo at syempre may takot kayo sa Panginoon.
Na rin ang Kazakhstan, they're bringing in their veterans and Mylene Paat.
Armed with her incredible international experience, a better and deadlier lefty Mylene Paat can be expected in the return of the Premier Volleyball League. The PVL games will start on March 16 and you can catch the action on One Sports, One Sports Plus, Signal Play, and the Smart Giga Play app. Gretchen Ho, we are One News. Time for another quick break. More of the big stories when we return.
You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. With price of local pump prices already at record highs, motorists now look for alternatives to car use.
According to experts, there still are ways we can enjoy driving while saving up on gas. Marian Enriquez gives us tips in this report.
With 11 straight weeks of oil price hikes, fuel in this gasoline station in Manila now goes as high as 77 pesos per liter. But this is already considered cheap. It can cost as high as 90 pesos in other cities. That's why some motorists are now desperate for ways to save up on gas. But how exactly do you do that? Jason Tulio, assistant managing editor of Top Gear Philippines, says the first tip is to make sure that your vehicle is well maintained.
If something's wrong with the engine or the tires or the suspension, maaring mapuwersa yung makina at mahirapan siyang tumakbo, and that results in consuming more fuel.
Tulio also pointed out the importance of having the right tire pressure.
Tires are designed to run at optimum efficiency with a certain level of air inside the car. Pag tumatakbo kasi yung kotse, syempre yung nakakontak sa sahig ay yung gulong. So it has to do with the amount of surface area na nakaano sa gulong. Honestly, it's quite complicated.
The expert says that it also helps to carry only light baggages and to refrain from going too fast.
You step confidently but gently. You use as much power as you need without using too much. Another thing is iwasan natin yung tinatawag nilang idling, yung naka-on lang yung sasakyan habang hindi umaandar.
But another way to enjoy being in a car without worrying about crude costs as much? Carpooling. Jello is fond of carpooling and says it has lots of benefits.
For example, kahit a minimum magkaroon ka ng 3 passengers, that's 300 one way. So pag pauwi ka, most likely meron ka rin kasabay dyan pauwi, depende sa schedule mo. So that's 600 per day. So usually yun na yung pwede mong gawin na panggas mo.
As spike in fuel prices is showing no signs of slowing down, it surely won't hurt to follow these tips to save up on a few pesos. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
President Nadine has spoken. Actress and singer Nadine Lustre, dubbed by the internet as President Nadine, has made her presidential candidate known. It's none other than Vice President Leni Robredo. In an interview, Nadine cited Robredo's track record as her reason for endorsing the Vice President.
Bakit mo ba tatagalin pa? Alam naman ng lahat na Team Pink din ako.
Pink din si Nadine Lustre. Confirmed.
Very, very vocal about it.
Aside from this, she also said that she supports Vice Presidential bet Kiko Pangilinan too. Nadine added that she respects everyone's choice but advises voters to know who they are voting for and to weigh who among candidates really care for the country. Very presidential indeed. For News 5, MJ Marfori, we are One News.
How much po? Megastar Sharon Cuneta momentarily interrupted her husband Kiko Pangilinan's vice presidential campaign rally.
During the campaign rally, Sharon Cuneta was spotted recommending an unidentified product to a person on stage. The showbiz icon reshared a video from a supporter who noticed that she appeared to be recommending a boxed item to an elderly seatmate. This was happening while Robredo could be seen delivering a speech in the foreground.
Sharon took out the item from the box while her seatmate took pictures of the product. Some netizens speculated that Sharon could have been selling lagundi or turmeric. The megastar reposted these quips with laughing emojis, but she didn't clarify if she was actually selling.
Yan ang diskarte.
Ano kaya yun? Talagang hirap talaga ng buhay ngayon, ano?
Diba? Oo.
Talagang pati si megastar kailangan kumita.
Tumataas na kasi yung presyo ng bilihin. Pwedeng perfume, pwedeng ano pa ba?
Antayin natin yung live selling mamaya.
Pero maganda yun. Natututo ako kung paano dumiskarte sa buhay, no? Kahit gaano ka-successful si Ate Shawi. That's something we can all learn from. Happy pandemic. Hindi pala happy. Pandemic lockdown anniversary.
Ngayon ba?
Today, March 15.
2 years.
2 years na.
Okay.
We hope that it stops right here and we get to alert level 0 safely. That wraps up today's Big Story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Hall. We are One News. Have a good evening.